Yes, this is one of those places I end up often when I want to get my daily fix of aviation. It's a small airport on the Spanish side of the Pyrenees Mountains, and I typically end up at a closed and locked gate. And the only way to get access to planes and pilots is to either punch in the code, and no, it's not the field elevation or CTAF or runway orientation, or to have a very, very good argument to convince the gatekeeper in his little office to let you in. And it's the only access to the airfield and to all planes and pilots and hangars and stuff, because the whole place is fenced in. Yes, access to general aviation is really difficult in Europe. Now, small airports in the US are also often fenced in. And this is mostly a consequence of 9/11, I think. But there's always a door or an open gate, or at least a gate with a code which can be rather easily guessed by anybody who is involved in aviation who has a strong interest in it. A code to get in, or, as in my case, when I landed at those small airports to camp, to get out, to go to a restaurant, or to buy food. And yes, there are a few little airfields in Europe where access is easier. They're typically small clubs out in the country or a soaring club operating from its own strip. But even there, you have lots of signs prohibiting this, prohibiting that, call here before you want to come in, and all this kind of stuff. And I think the big difference in accessibility between Europe and the US comes from the fact that flying small airplanes is considered a privilege in Europe. It's a hobby for the rich. And that creates a sort of a circle of exclusivity around pilots. And it's that, and it's maintaining that exclusivity which makes pilots themselves impede deliberately access to general aviation, access to the airfields. And then there's bureaucracy, of course, which is much more controlling, selective, and limiting in Europe than it's in the US. And also the attitude of pilots towards anybody who has even the slightest interest in aviation is entirely different in the US. It's inclusive, not exclusive. Come on here, let me show you. You want to know what flying is all about? Well, hop in. I'll take you around the patch once or twice. I remember that back in the late 80s, when I had my first flying experiences in the US, it was just like that. Nobody wanted to have a fence around the airport or a gate locking people out. No, they would welcome anybody who wanted to find out what flying is all about. And even now, all the pilots I met on my trips didn't want to have anything to do with gates and fences and everything. And even though those were mandated by the authorities after 9/11, I think, those pilots would always make sure that the key or the code was fairly easy to find for anybody involved in aviation. So that made a big difference in the accessibility of general aviation. Now, I've been in the flying environment for long enough that I always find a person to talk to. And here, without being a member of any club, and I haven't flown here so far at all, I found a soaring pilot. I talked to him, we chatted, and he said, you know what? You don't have to go through the gate. I show you the little door where you can come out and help us launch gliders. So, yes, there are those exemptions. But that doesn't make a big difference in the fact that access to general aviation is a lot more difficult in Europe than it is in the US. Well, first, maybe in my little series, about differences from my point of view of flying in the US versus flying in Europe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.